welcome. As you see, this is Crisis to Action, Lessons from the International Elder Circle. So it is a huge honor. My name is Janet Naklia. I'm a programs manager with Alberta Recreation and Parks. So thank you all for joining us today. I know it's the evening, it's around dinner time, but it will definitely be worth your while. So as is our protocol, before we even start today, I would like to invite Dr. Reg Crowshoe and Rose Crowshoe, who are Blackfoot elders, traditional knowledge keepers, and have been partners and friends of ARPA for quite a while now. So we'd like to offer this tobacco to you, Reg, so that you can start us in a good way. And if anyone has their smudge, I invite you to also join in a way that is meaningful to you.
Okay. I just like to light my smudge now, and it's our way when we light our smudge to acknowledge Creator for all the gifts that He gives us. About even to be able to get together is a gift, even in this crazy times of COVID. And we got to take the best of what we have and move ahead. So I'll make my smudge and we can start. Oh, Kishupeta. Ay, napi natus. Oh, Kitas Kachimadan. Adam 6 that you get Kishiko. Ay, Stupeta Pio, Bispomo, Kinana, Christikoi. I'm Sticha is Chich. Oh, come Sticha, Chik. Oh, come straight to Muktakui Kispinana. Oh, tape Spinana. Ay, Spomo, Stupeta Pio, Station. Toch poka po takiman no nakuman stay ka kimanya makod sa tapi to sa ni tapio hago kitpok suka po o ker hago sis kato pa kristikoy hani ka daya chi po spinan makukana suka is o kanwa chimo kana kom kitapio kana po ka kas kidima chawa o kani kom kristi stop sen akso sino o kini tama kamutan yan. I'd just like to say my name is Awakasina, Reg Crowshoe, and I'm zooming in from the Piikani First Nation in southern Alberta. And
okay, my name is Rose Crowshoe, and I'm from the Piikani Nation, and also zooming in from Piikani. It's just snowing outside. We can barely see the neighbor's house.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Reg and Rose, for that beautiful blessing. That was lovely. And also, I should say that I am here in Calgary. So I'm in Mohkinstsis, which is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot people, the Blackfoot Confederacy. And we're talking about the International Elder Circle. But a lot of the conversation that was had at the circle that you'll find out soon was about the land and the connection to the land and the importance that the land has within recovery and mental health and all those pieces within the nations and I think within all societies. So I just wanted to acknowledge the land that I am on in a good way, because that does show to be a very important part of the work we do and of the conversation that's coming forward. So thank you so much for that. So as I mentioned, this is a panel discussion. It is a selection of elders that were part of our International Elder Circle that just happened 2 weeks ago. This was an initiative held in collaboration with World Urban Parks. They are our partners. The ARPA is the secretariat for that. And so we work together to get elders from around the world to come together and talk about crisis to action, like what learnings do they have about COVID. But before we start on that, I would like to do introductions. So Reg and Rose, would you like to do more introduction, or are you good? You're good? That was your
I just want to mention when I was younger, my father, when he ran ceremonies, he always used to say, call our ancestors when we have our ceremonies, because they come and help the spirits of our ancestors and of the land. So when he started his ceremony, he's always saying, when I go to spirit world, I'll spirit travel back into your ceremony through the smudge, so I'll always be there. So that's how I'm looking at today's gathering, starting with the smudge. I feel our ancestors, our relatives, are all spirit traveling through the smudge to be here with all of us as we talk. And when he says he spirit travels and comes to our ceremony through the smudge, I always think of Zoom. Zoom, I travel into your meeting to be there on Zoom through the technology of Zoom. So Zoom is the same as I would look at as a smudge, which allows me to be there. And I'm Zoom traveling from the Piikani First Nation into your gathering. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much for that. And interesting enough, if it wasn't for Zoom, we wouldn't have been able to have this circle, because we are talking with elders from across the world. So thank you to Zoom. So our next elder, I would like to call on, also from Canada. So Elder Carrie Moore, who is a psychotherapist as well as an elder. I'd like to call Carrie to introduce yourself. And those who are following ARPA's work, Carrie has been very active in the culture camp, Okotoks Indigenous River Culture Camp that we did, as well as other activities. She's also speaking tomorrow. So anyone who wants to hear more from Carrie, please follow her session tomorrow. So Carrie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carrie Moore. The Tanako Muksanaki is my Blackfoot name. Wapan Mihikanagakasqueo is my Cree name. I'm originally from Saskatchewan. I am Cree Métis. My family reserve is Muscadet Reserve in Saskatchewan. I am also an elder with the Métis Nation at Christopher Lake in Saskatchewan, as well as with Area 3 Métis Nation here in Alberta. So I'm very, very honored to be here. And it's wonderful to see all of you. Only 2 weeks ago, Dr. Hekai and Ida joined us, and it was wonderful to have that discussion. And welcome everyone. It is really wonderful that we can meet by Zoom, as Reg is saying. It's kind of an interesting sort of way to do this. We weren't sure we could do it at all in the beginning, but we're still doing that. And you're right, we would never have the ability to meet on an international level with the other elders. So I'm very, very honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. And so the first of our international guests, we're extremely excited to have her here. So Elder Ida Downwind, I would like to call you forward to introduce yourself, calling in from the United States. So our border has been broken. You are here with us today. So welcome, Ida.
Hello. I misheard you, but I will not tell you what I heard, right? Anyway, my name is what they call Ida Downwind in Jaga Ashimang, which means in English, that's what they call me. But my name is actually Pintewa Kawi, which means she walks through fire. And it goes along well with my younger name, Mushkane Nabikwe, which is she carries the water. I don't think I have to explain that to very many, but I'm here. And I was just thinking, you know, I could list all the letters behind my name, but I will not. Because sometimes I feel like sometimes that creates a barrier. Um, Even for some of our elders, those that are older than me, even that don't feel like maybe they don't have things to offer when we do that, and it's kind of like in our way of looking at life. So you have to be mindful of who your audience is, and I say that out loud because I'm thinking about my elders as I prepared um, for this panel. So I'm going to make a joke also. So I had an email that says the check's in the mail. But I didn't know if I could trust it. You know, I was told that about 6 months ago, and they owed me $3,000, right? And I never got it. But if you also know our culture, it's, you know, it's you let go of so many things because you know life itself takes care of itself also. So I say that out loud. I'm just teasing you, Janet.
The check is in the mail. I promise you. It really is.
I'm teasing you. I'm teasing you. You don't have to explain. Right?
I think if Steve pops in somewhere, I think he actually put it in the mail. I don't know where you are, Steve, but he could actually vouch for it. I promise. Call me if it isn't. And that was beautiful. Thank you. Such a beautiful name. I really do appreciate that. So I'm really excited. I am so excited to have you here, Ida. That's amazing. And then speaking of titles, so then we also have Dr. Heke from New Zealand. And I'd like to also welcome him to come here. So he is the elder from furthest abroad. And again, and time zone difference, I think it's a completely different day for him. So welcome. Welcome to the panel today.
Tēnā tātou, kone taku mihi kia koutou ngā kai mahi kai tautoko ki tēnā o tātou mahi. Nei rā ta mihi ki a koe Aira, mō te manaaki tangararo I te tuanui o tēnei whare. Ko koutou oku ho mahi hou ki tēnei, tēnā koutou. It's with much humility that I accepted the invitation to come along and speak today. I did have one caveat when I spoke to our mate here, Janet. I said, if Ida goes on, I will. If Ida doesn't go, I won't. So I'm not sure whether even Ida had agreed, but she said, yes, Ida's agreed. So I said, all right, I'll come. Now that I'm here, I'm interested to hear how things will progress with the feedback from the Elders Circle, and excited to be part of the process. But I got to point out that only being in my 50s, I hardly get into the Elders Circle. I'm just there to carry their bags.
Yep.
Thanks so much. And I did ask Ida first. So, you know, it was ethical in my invitation. And so also I would like to introduce, we have a special panel moderator today. So eventually I will turn this over to Heather Cowie. And so if you don't know Heather, many of you do, Heather is the ARPA board president. And as I was saying to our elders earlier today, to respect them, we brought in our big gun. So we brought in our president to chat with them, because the knowledge that is being shared, it's such important. It was such an honor to have had their circle with them, and it's such an honor to have this panel with them right now. And so if you want to just quickly introduce yourself, Heather, and then we'll get down to business.
Certainly. As Janet said, every time I say it, I'm Heather Cowie. I'm the proud president of the Alberta Recreation and Parks Association. But I think the work that Janet has done with and for and together with the Indigenous community has been amazing. And I am deeply honored to be able to provide just a small piece of today and to learn. I keep saying my favorite saying is, when you know better, you do better. And when we hang out together, we get smarter. So this is our journey, and we're grateful for this journey and delighted to be here. Reg and Rose Crowshoe, my heart, just so grateful to see you both. And I'm looking forward to learning and to get smarter as we go through this. So thank you everyone for giving us your time and your brains and your passion and your enthusiasm. I'm just unbelievably grateful. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And okay, so why are we here? We're here to hear from the elders, so we'll get to that very quickly. This is also the launch of our reconciliation stream. So over the past few years, ARPA has been doing sessions in our conference that highlight Indigenous voices from community, successes, and work that we've done in collaboration. A lot of those sessions will be tomorrow on Thursday, but this is the official launch of that stream of presentation. So thank you all for being here today for that. So the story goes, we have been working with the group of elders, the Elders Knowledge Circle, that is a group in Treaty 7 area that is facilitated by Reg and Rose Crowshoe. And what came out of that when COVID hit was a bit of a sense of distress. And a lot of that came from the fact that being a vulnerable population, so being elders in a senior population, they were instantly removed from their community, from their families, put into isolation. And that did cause a lot of mental distress, social isolation, a lot of things that came along with that. And I think many of us have experienced that, but particularly with elders within a Canadian context, they are the linchpins of community. They go and they speak to community groups, they help out individual community members, very, very active. And so all of that was quickly shut down. So out of that came an interest, sparked an interest to know what people elsewhere were doing to combat this sense of isolation in terms of that Indigenous perspective and Indigenous context. And as I mentioned before, we are also the Secretariat of World Urban Parks. So Ben, who many of you know Ben, said, hey, we have this international connection and we know some people across the globe. Maybe we should reach out and see if there's an interest in the elders coming together and talking about ways that they are actions, like first issues that they're seeing, and actions that they have identified to help mitigate the distress that is found in community. And so with that, we called around, we talked to some people, we brought together 20 elders from Treaty 7 area. So this happened 2 weeks ago on Zoom. So the group of elders, many of which have worked, as you know, over the years with ARPA. We had that park circle that they worked with us on the culture camp for the past 3 years. And then we also reached out to elders from across the world. So we had 6 different elders join us in various degrees from an international context. So it was 2 days. 1 day was identifying issues, second day was identifying actions, and we're just now compiling that information. So part of, and I also should say that it was sponsored by the Canadian Red Cross and City of Calgary. Change Can't Wait Foundation or Fund was the sponsors for that. So what then, and I should also say that a lot of that information shared in that circle was the elders. So that was for them, and that information was meant for them. It's for them to increase their capacity, and that information will stay with the elders. However, we know that as community members, we do benefit from the knowledge and the wisdom that the elders can pass on to us. And so the elders we see here today have agreed to share with us the insights that they had from this circle with the community, and also kind of thoughts they might have in terms of how this can be actioned further as we look at what COVID is and just generally look at what the community is at large. So that's kind of the greater context. So like I said, a lot of that information that was talked about will stay with the elders, but the ones we're talking today are willing to share their thoughts on how that rolled. And so I will now turn it over to Heather, she has 2 questions that we'll ask the elders, and then I will also monitor the Huva. So again, for those who are new joining us, we cannot chat within this Zoom setting. So any questions you might have for the elders, you have to put them in Huva. I will monitor that. And as we go forward, and if there's time at the end, we'll answer those questions as well. So with that, Heather, I'm turning it over to you, and we will have the conversation with the elders because that's why we're here.
That's right. Awesome. Thank you. So I think Janet has prepped you with the questions. Dr. Reg, you get to go first. So the question that we have is, what is the biggest takeaway you had from the International Elders Circle?
I just like to thank the organization and ARPA and Janet's hard work working with the elders and getting together with this conference or that were for this panel, but also to recognize the hard work that was put in to get the elders all together from all over the world. I think one of the things I was thinking about was as elders, we had our discussions, we were gathering in our circles, and we were dealing with how we might look at the concept of Indigenous knowledge and how can we build Indigenous knowledge amongst ourselves, but also build more human capacity so that we can help organizations. And as the group was gathering, the COVID hit in March, and as it hit, there was a lot of the elders that were kind of shocked. They were confused, and as Janet was saying, a lot of things were shut down. They were isolated at home. So as April came along, when we got together with the elders, we all finally connected with technology, and we came together. We had many different discussions with the elders. And one of the things that with the older elders, like John Chief Moon and Wallace Bear had, or Bear Chief from Siksika, and other elders that were a lot older that were on this circle, they remember the days. And I remember the days when I was on our reserve, where we're all isolated and locked up on a reserve. And then we end up going to residential school, and you're isolated with a group of kids. So isolation was something we were used to. But as I was saying, in the 50s, we wouldn't speak our language, sing, or do anything from our culture because we knew the Indian agent was going to be after us. And that was a life we grew up with. But then now we're looking at today, where we're talking about how we might look at working with elders and knowledge and having our songs and ceremonies and smudge. I never thought in my lifetime at that time that I would ever be at this point to share my culture, because it was always locked out. So when this COVID came and it brought the elders back to the time when we were isolated, really isolated, you could feel the shock from the elders from that. But they had to get over it, because when we started getting our meetings together, they had a chance to talk about it and then realize that time is different today than the times we were isolated. And then they started talking about how we survived pandemic, smallpox, and what they heard in history from stories from their parents, grandparents. So I think that was one of the main things that the elders talked about, was that isolation, the loneliness, and connection to the land. We're a verbal society, and we are related to the land. The land is our relative. So when we have our ceremonies, we're connected to the land. And isolation connects us individually to the land, but not as a group of people in like our ceremonies. When we gather together, we all help each other, and we know that's normal. But when we're isolating and individually connecting with the land, it's helpful, but at the same time, it's also different because you're individual, not as a group. So that was the elders' shock on isolation. Um, so when we talked about getting together with elders, international elders, I think my biggest takeaway is basically what Janet said at the beginning. We broke the border; it's not there anymore through Zoom, and we can get together with other elders through this technology of Zoom. And speaking to other elders and seeing and hearing their concerns, their issues, all of a sudden you're not isolated as much. Because of technology, we can think, well, we're not the only ones that was given this hard time. In our culture, we've had dealt with a lot of deaths due to not only COVID, but these pills and drugs. And when somebody loses a family member, we can't even go to their funerals. So I think that was a shock to the elders, because in our culture, when somebody passes away, it was part of our way that we go visit that family, and when we enter their home, we ask for a smudge, and then we tell them, I'm here to cry with you. And you cry all together because of mourning with them in their hard times. But we can't even do that nowadays. People are crying by themselves, but because they're losing their loved ones, and others are not coming. So those are the hard times. But as with the international, we see the parallels to some of like language and culture and connection to the land, and connection to ceremony, connection to other people. That is all important. And since the same connections are being affected, I think that's my biggest takeaway from this international elder circle. So I'll turn it over to Rose.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just like to thank the organization for making us all having this Zoom with the elders, and it was really an experience to see and hear, and even when we make the smudge, like that spiritual was still there. It was, you could almost, well, I could almost see it flowing from overseas, and sharing the stories. And also when we share stories, there's knowledge that comes out. So we learned a lot from each other, and we're all we're all people that live off the land, even though Westerners, everybody lives, but somewhere we have lost that connection. And with having the Zoom with the international elders, you're able to join and continue to talk on those issues that are really destroying our landscape.
Mm.
So, and the biggest takeaway that I liked, at the end, we had a talent show, and they shared their talent from their culture, which was awesome. It was like almost you were right there in person. So it was really, I really liked that. So I'll just end there because Reggie covered a lot. Thank you again for everything.
That's thank you both. That's very interesting. I love the part about sharing, and that sharing builds that connection, right? And that's, we are wired for connection. So thank you both for that. Carrie, can I ask for your perspective? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Heather, for bringing us together. And thank you, Reg and Rose, and Dr. Hekai and Ida, who were there. And thank you to all of you, because I just found that 2 weeks ago when we had that international elder circle, it was a real connection for me. We started out in the beginning with Zoom, and we were all struggling to figure out how we were going to do this. When were we going to see each other again? And we found out that Zoom became quite the connection for us. And so I keep saying Zoom, but Zoom has been a great help to us to be able to do ceremonies, to be able to talk to each other online. And so I think that's what I was hearing from everybody at that gathering, was that we started out thinking this isn't going to work, or what are we going to do? And we walked away realizing that we can do things this way that we couldn't do before. We could reach more people, and that connects us even more. We all talked about Mother Earth. That was something that I heard from everybody. Is how when we are doing ceremonies, we go back to Mother Earth and the medicines on Mother Earth and everything around us. And so that was very reaffirming to hear those stories. I love the story about the clouds, Dr. Hekai, because we have stories of that, like that in the Cree culture as well. So we know that our stories are very similar, very similar. They're just told in slightly different ways depending on the territory you come from, and with the different languages, of course. And I just found I felt very connected to everyone, no matter where they were coming from. So, but Mother Earth has been a great saving grace for me, because it made me go into isolation for 5 months in my territory in Saskatchewan, in Treaty 6 territory. And it was the first time in many, many years that I had that opportunity to be on Mother Earth every single day where I came from, which makes a huge difference. And that was another thing that we talked about, is about where we come from and how important it is to be connecting to our families and our relatives, and the territories that we're from, how important that is to us. And so that day was a very profound day for me when we actually met 2 weeks ago, because I had been sitting with a lady who had a very deep loss that day. And I was teaching her to do ceremony. And because we know that people are looking everywhere for their elders, reaching out to the elders and the knowledge keepers. How do we do this ceremony? And I just found that I was teaching a lot more people how to do that smudge, and people were listening to that, so that they didn't have to always look for someone else. They have the ability to do that themselves. They have the permission to do that themselves. They don't need to ask that permission. So it was just so wonderful to hear similar stories, those parallels, as you say, between all of us, about how important our territories are, how important our language is, how important our stories are. They are the healers. That very day when I was trying to help that dear lady, while we were sitting on Mother Earth, the thunder cracked above me and the rain fell. And we did not move. We sat there with tears in our eyes, praying. And we knew at that moment that Mother Earth had come to help us. It wasn't just us. She was there to support us in that ceremony. And it really connected me. And then I had the wonderful opportunity to come and speak on Zoom to all of the elders and really connect with everyone too. So I think the greatest takeaway that I had was that we are very similar everywhere in the world. We really aren't that different. We're not different. We just have certain differences when it comes to our language and our medicines and our songs and that kind of thing. But we all have medicines and songs. We all have languages. We all have our communities, and so it was very connecting for me, very reaffirming for me to know that here in Canada we are not alone. I am not alone. Not only do I have the wonderful elders that I feel so connected to here, but we know that there are elders everywhere that we can reach out to. And honestly, now that we've made that connection, I know that we will stay in touch and support each other and our communities as we go further. I think that is the future. I truly do. Zoom has provided us the ability to reach beyond our territories. And I think that this will be something new. I think we know that when we come together as a collective, it's far easier for us to help each other than it is to do it alone. And if there's one thing that really stuck in my mind about bringing us together, Janet, was the fact that we're on the same page and we're going to work together. And it was really, really wonderful. So I thank you for bringing us together.
Thank you. I think you have spoken to my heart. Many complaints about if I have to do another Zoom meeting again, if I have to do another WebEx, or if I have to. But what you've said is that you've shared the gift of what this technology can do. And I think it's about an orientation of, I think, gratitude and appreciation. We can't walk this walk alone, and we need each other, and we're wired for that connection. So, and resilience. It's about resilience, and I really appreciate that perspective. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate that. I think, Ida, you are next to speak about your what you took away from the International Elder Circle.
How long do I have?
You,
How long do I have?
What you do, what you need to do. We got
Okay.
you.
I don't want to use up too much time out of respect for my other elders. But one of the, my grandmother, I was primarily raised by my grandmother and the elders in my community when I was young. And then they scooped us up, and then they put us in this place where the Black Robes lived. And then we were suddenly plopped back into our community. And so one thing that I found just in my own reflection, right? One thing that I found is that I was blessed because I had the opportunity to spend, till I was 5 years old with my community. And so I say that out loud because there's so many of our people that have not had that opportunity. So what that gave me was an outlook on life and a way to think about things. Now, one of the things that we use a lot of words, English uses a lot of words for a lot of things. Yeah. How many, many different ways to say, I don't know, front and back, maybe, but we do too, right? But our pattern of thinking teaches us to think about that front and back deeply and not narrowly and not thinly, like that. Whereas dominant culture teaches this narrow view of what that is, right? Because there's a right and a wrong. Where the way that I was taught and the way that I learned from the elders on the call was we don't have necessarily what you'd say a right way and a wrong way. You know, we give you those tools and those ways of knowing and the values to help you think through so you can make a decision about what that is, right? And it's like, otherwise, like the quickest example would be, no, I won't go there because I'll take you on a long journey. But that was one of the things that I really like, one of the takeaways that was reinforced in me. We don't necessarily think shallow about things. We think and we feel deeply, almost like to the soul level. You know, like there's people that right away will say, oh, there's Ida again. She doesn't cut, she just cuts right to the chase. I'll name what it is. I'll call it what it is, but always in a real kind of loving, caring way, because that's the way that I was raised and with respect. And I just jotted some notes because I listen differently, I think, than all of you. Maybe all of you are listening with your ears, but I'm listening with my heart, because I'm really believing that that's the only way that we're going to really help each other and help one another through this tough time, you know. And that was, you know, that ceremonies were very important, right down to what we call ceremony. Smudging is ceremony. When I, you know, when I was young, it was this moment I opened my mouth to share my breath. That's ceremony. So that explanation about what ceremony is very different than dominant culture, right? Or what? Well, maybe we're gaining in dominance now. I don't know, but I mean, you know what I mean? Like the people who colonized us and try to change who we were by using a lot of different words, and that you know, we talked a lot about ceremony and that cultural. You know, those cultural celebrations and how are we creatively doing those things. Like you know, I know in our community here in Minneapolis, in the middle of Little Earth housing, which is primarily, you know, right in South Minneapolis here, they had like a little what we call round dance, and that's just where people get together and they sing and they danced. There wasn't that many people, and of course everybody was masked up. Everybody respected, you know, in the way of saying, this is how we contain that spread of that invisible enemy. Right? So, and so that's one of the other things that I really appreciated was the creative ways that the elders are finding to continue with that, those ceremonies, those creative ways. The other thing I keep hearing, land-based and recognition of the land, you know, and I keep saying, well, we want the land back, you know, because so much of our spirits are connected to land, and we know that, right? And so it's kind of like in Rapid City, South Dakota right now, Minnemuzaha, which is Rapid City, and in Pahasapa, you know what, I don't even like to use his name, because the moment that I say his name, it'll give him power, and I won't allow that to happen, right? When he held this 4th of July celebration in the middle of the Black Hills, shot off fireworks in the middle of like a dry time, and on the land of the Lakota people, a land, you know, that was signed over by treaty. So it's kind of like, how can we work together to come back and say, how can we get that back? How can we get that power back, right? And I really believe that it's through working with one another like this, but also to be able to be honest with one another and know that, most certainly all of us here, our intention is not to harm and to hurt, right? Um, but it's also, I'm called as part of my culture, the values is to be honest, right? And be, show some humility at the same time. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I also heard him talk about, the values, right? And how are those values transmitted? And I think that was a great also connection to the land. We learned a lot. We still are learning a lot from the land. And the respect for the land, we learn respect for each other. And I'm thinking, the health, when we're talking about health, colonizers, I always have a hard time remembering those 4 parts, right? Mind, I always say mind, body, spirit, right? And then I think, what's that other piece? What's that other piece? To the point where I have to look it up, right? So it's emotional, right? And only in the colonizer's view can they separate those pieces in such a clear, and I always say, that I think that's a cool way too. I don't remember who I heard say that, but I always thought it was a cool way of, saying outside. It's easy to segment yourself. It's harder to look at yourself as a whole being and the responsibility that it carries to all of those. And I can't remember who said it. I just remember, and I wrote it down. And so I really, and the music and the song and the whole act of, like, it just is speaking. And it was like that in itself said to me, I don't mind sharing my sacred breath with these folks. I'm a little nervous today, right? Simply because I have been taught not to trust my colonizers. So it takes a little bit for me to say, I trust you, right? And so then I think that that's, one of the clear things in my saying, I have to show courage enough to say, give us our land back, honor those treaties, even in Canada, the reconciliation efforts, like I'm thinking about that and thinking, well, it's horseshit if the colonizer is still holding on to the power and still saying only you can have it or you can have it, and I decide who that is, right? And the same in the States here. Look at how mad this place is right now. It's like, oh, and then and it's like they're asking for our help, but at the same time disrespecting it. And so it kind of helps, makes us elders go, well, what am I going to say anyway, right? Because nobody's going to hear me, because you see, you're hearing me, but how many of you really hear me? You see?
Yep.
And that's what I mean. And so I'm, I'll help you, but the obligation and that kind of piece is for you all to help us of all tribes, right? And all peoples who have been forced to live a life that we did not choose, right? So that's kind of one of those takeaways. This was my reflection of my takeaways, mind you. Because like I said, I was taught to listen differently. In the first person's voice I should hear of human form is my own. And if I can't honestly reflect and be truthful to that and then the voice of my ancestors, then what purpose am I serving, right? And I heard, like I said, the song and the spirit of voice was just so profound and still is to me. And that's what makes, even though Zoom has connected us, it's also made it difficult, because it's like, then I have to sit down and watch each of you in a different way and try to feel your spirit through something that is already throwing out all kinds of weird electrical kind of things, you see? So sometimes those emotions can get confused in there. And so then it calls us to be even more honest and more truthful, but at the same time, we have to think about it harder, I think, when we say that. And that's why I was saying I teased Janet, and she started to explain right away, right? And I didn't want her to do that. I wanted her to laugh, right?
Yeah.
But she doesn't know, that tells me that maybe she doesn't know enough to tell us that, oh, this tribe really jokes a lot. You can't get by without being teased, right? And usually, ask Ihi, if I tease you, then
Good.
I might like you a little bit. I'd say I might, because it
Maybe.
takes a while. Takes a while to trust me.
A little bit.
That there was a word that I had to. It's a ichikia. Yeah, it means that we always, as a nation, as Lakota or whatever place we're from, it's always that deep thinking and that deep reflection and that deep things that helped us to figure out what we, how to make good choices and that kind of thing, even about our health, right? And to realize that we don't have to force ourselves to separate those four pieces, that we can see ourselves as a whole being just as we are. We don't need all those words. And the only thing that we have to be careful of is that you don't pick a way that you can't get rid of. I won't even explain it.
You're gonna
I'm not
feel.
Because I want you to think about it. Yeah. We have a word for that. But I really appreciated that time with the elders, because every time they spoke, I felt that non-separation of who I am as a person. So
Nice.
yeah. So
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for trusting us, for sharing. Certainly from my perspective. You want to keep going?
No, I'm just going to say, just because I told you the truth doesn't mean I necessarily trust you. You get what I'm saying?
No, but you took a risk with us, and I appreciate it. I so appreciate it. It's awesome.
All right.
And you absolutely made me uncomfortable, which I think we need. And I think I go back to my learning from Dr. Reg, ethical spaces. And that's what we're trying to do with this, is create ethical spaces, to have conversations and to learn and to grow. And that's what this is about. So thank you. Your honesty is deeply appreciated and respected. Thank you. I'm going to go to our last elder. And would you mind, sir, for me pronouncing your first and last name so I don't get it wrong the next time we speak?
Kia ora no tātou. My first name is Ihi. My last name is Heke, or Ihirangi Heke. I actually missed the plane in Minnesota once because they called out my name and said, "I hi, Rangi Hik," and I didn't recognize it. So the plane left and that was me still there. Anyway, I'm able to tell you that as New Zealand Maori, we are the youngest Indigenous people on the planet, because getting to New Zealand was always a difficult task in the Pacific, because no currents come this way, no winds come this way. So it was the last land anywhere in the South Pacific and potentially on the planet to be peopled, which means that we're the youngest Indigenous nation, which also means that we don't behave very well. When our government suggests things that we should do, we're not inclined to listen to that. Even when it's good advice, we're still not going to listen, because we're the youngest and most spoilt children, I suppose. So we are, or have the inclination to react quickly and aggressively and move on things that we think are beneficial for our people. When Zoom came out, everybody jumped on and moved fast, and still do. There's a Maori word that's similar in Hawaii about hui. Hui is when people come to meet. We've now translated that. We have zuis, where we're on Zoom and have a hui through Zoom. So whenever Maori talk about zui, that's what we're doing. So we grabbed a hold of it and moved quickly. We also decided very early on with the arrival of COVID that the important part then became the transfer of knowledge, and to increase that exponentially during that time. So our people right across the nation used Zoom, engaged with the transfer of knowledge as quickly as we could, because although COVID has been a health issue, we've been transferring into the space that health has nothing to do with people, that has more to do with the pursuit of knowledge. And as a consequence of understanding your land and your water, you get health as an incidental outcome. So we didn't focus on health. We didn't focus on COVID. We didn't focus on Zoom. We focused on teaching the process through Zoom of pursuing knowledge, regardless of the content. And through that, we improved the health of our elders and our Indigenous people right across the board, really, because we were providing health through extending out into places that they hadn't seen for a long time. So it's been a useful process for us in a lot of ways. And we're going to continue that forward for some time yet, because COVID's still hanging around a bit here. And I found that with my mates on the last talk that we had that were elders, Reg, Kerry, Reg's wahine, they were talking the same things. Ida was telling me the same things about what we're experiencing here. I don't know whether we misbehave more than Ida or not. I think she might be misbehaved more than us, I'd say. But we grabbed a hold of it and took off. So those are the things we learned from it, is that the elders circle had similar concepts, similar ideas, and that we all seem to be moving towards it. Because we're the youngest, we're the most impatient. So we jumped early. That's it.
Had to do the ending. Thank you. I appreciate that. I love the youngest and the most least behaved. That's interesting. I hadn't even considered that at all. I appreciate your perspective. The next question I have is, how can people apply this knowledge in their own communities? And Ida, I'm going to go to you first. So the question about how can people apply this knowledge in their own communities?
Are you sure? Anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure, totally sure.
I always say that I always go first. We need is the land. Everyone. I know down here in where I'm at, in what you call the States, right? I always say, well, what can we do to help you? And I always go, well, give us our land back. Because our whole being is tied so close to the land and the water. And so you can't, it's like we want you to heal, but we want you to heal through our methods and not necessarily the methods of your people. Because if we allow you to do that, then what's going to happen is we're going to lose power. We as the colonizers are going to lose power. And so we just keep shaking our heads going, oh, so what can we do, right? And we do the best we can, and working with, I know for myself, working with my community, and working on land-based, I don't like the word therapy either. It's land and water-based ways of looking at your life and shifting the way that you can do those things amongst the trauma that they're still experiencing, right? Because we cannot go to the store, at least me, as dark as I am, go to the store without oftentimes being watched. Or I might say something and no one will listen to me. They'll just shake their heads, but they don't hear me. But they'll go to someone who is lighter skinned than me and ask the same question and take that, so there's a lot of racism and a lot of, work that needs to be done. But if I was to say, how did they do that in there? I say, go back to your land-based knowledge, your land and water-based knowledge. Go back to that place of knowing in your spirit that tells you that this is guided you all your life, especially because we're still here. We're here because we were able to listen to those things. So I always say that because I can't, and their songs, are there words that they use to help get through hard times, then use them, and pay attention to your, like, closest I can come is pay attention to the way that you make relatives, right? Like for us, we say all our relatives, and I don't just mean my human relatives, but I mean the land, everything that surrounds me. That's what I'm talking about. And that each generation that has followed me, I'm doing the best I can to raise them with that idea of relative. We don't have half siblings. We don't have half uncles, half aunties, half step this or step that or step, because our languages didn't include that. What they did include is the word relative. And how do I become, to use the English word, good relative, right? And that only happens when you go back to those values that you were taught when you were young, and that's about all I can say about that,
Thank you. I appreciate that. Interesting perspective. Yeah, when you talk about the difference in language, it is, we separate, you're half as opposed to all. It doesn't matter. It's about all. So thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to see if I get this right. Iki, would you mind? Did I say that right? I didn't say it right, did I? Not at all. Not even close.
No, not even close. I would have missed that plane again.
Sorry, my apologies.
That's all right. How we apply knowledge here is of the stuff that we learned from the Elder Circle. We've got a specific pattern that we use. Mātauranga Māori is the pursuit of Indigenous knowledge. That's always going to be at the top for us. So although, again, COVID has been the aim of this, we still believe that if we want to change the health outcomes, we have to teach more knowledge, not about health, but about traditional environmental knowledge and biodiversity. And through that, we get health and attention to COVID without confronting it directly. It means that we can move forward. And the main reason for this is that in Māori communities, health is a dirty word. It's been used to control our communities for decades. So we don't discuss health issues very often without a feeling as though we're being held down by it. So we're shifting into more of a strength-based approach of looking at how knowledge can help us transition into incidental gains. So we have an umbrella concept that looks at Indigenous knowledge first. From there, we go to looking at what our connections are to that type of knowledge. So that if I live near the ocean, then there's a contextual relevance for why we would teach knowledge that comes from the ocean. But if I'm a mountain person and they're trying to teach me mountain information, there's no context for why. So we have to make it more specific to the group we're working with. Now, what happened here in the 1980s was a process called kaupapa Māori, which meant that anything that had to do with Māori concepts would be included in political and educational pursuits. That time's finished, and it probably finished 10 years ago, which means that although we've got access to education and into the political arena, we very quickly decided after that that we wanted tribal versions. And quite soon we'll probably move into the next stage of wanting community versions of education or of health, which means that government policy that's aimed at all Māori is completely ineffective. So it means that when we talk about contextual relevance, if it's a health program aimed at addressing COVID through introducing knowledge-based concepts that might be looking at a particular plant, now our people want information that's only in their community, which is quite a big change. And it's a bigger demand on the groups that are providing that because they have to know a lot more depth of knowledge about an area. Followed from that is that we're now teaching more tacitly or directly, if you're knowing this information from a knowledge, how do you transfer it into another space? Which means that if we're developing capacity in our communities to understand biodiversity and traditional environmental knowledge better, how do we then move to dynamic capability where we take that information and use it in another context? Which means that if we teach them about water, that's great, but what do you need to know from water that's going to help you in your education, your relationships, your career, whichever. So in the past, probably 10, 15 years, we saw an increase in the number of sports academies in schools. And they hoped that if they rolled out a ball, it would fix them in a whole range of other areas. It doesn't. So now we teach it directly. This is what we want you to know from understanding that tree. That tree has a system of roots that intertwine, which means that they're dependent on each other because the ground is so wet, which means that we can transfer that metaphor into the idea that communities need to support each other, which means that health comes out of the environment rather than health coming from people. And we're building resources to reflect that. So we start with an umbrella concept, mātauranga Māori, or environmental knowledge, or Indigenous ancient knowledge. We drop down into contextual relevance of what type it is. Then we look at the metaphor for transferring that into other spaces. Second to last, we look at which modality we want to choose to deliver that. Now, in the past, if we wanted to address health issues like COVID, then we would use what were identified as Indigenous pathways, which might be paddling canoes, it might be doing performing arts. But what we've pushed our government towards is saying we can choose any modality we want. It doesn't have to be just those Indigenous or those things that are identified as Indigenous. We can use those, but I can teach our kids about health through skateboarding or through snowboarding or through surfing. The concepts are still underpinned by engaging with water or engaging with land or understanding star movements. So overall, arching principles of Indigenous knowledge drops down into what the contextual relevance is, then into what we're supposed to learn as a metaphor. Then we look at the modality, and the last thing we include in this framework is when. So through this stage of COVID, we've seen a 500% increase in the interest of understanding moon phases. So our people are studying the moon far more in far more depth at the moment, because the moon all through the Pacific is being used to judge when it's the best time to hunt, fish, and plant gardens. What we've been pushing them towards is that human performance in terms of health attributes or educational pursuits also align with the moon, and that we have two peak periods during the moon phases of a month, where we have high tide finishing on the arrival of the sun or the sunrise, which means that we can get double our power outputs up until 4 a.m. in the morning, and that happens twice every month. Because we see it in fish, we see it in birds, we see it in trees. And what's happening, interestingly, around that is the phases for those have shifted because of climate control or climate issues. That what used to be relevant for our ancestors 100 years ago for reading off moon phases when it was the best time to plant aren't working now. They're out by a couple of weeks and sometimes by 2 to 3 months. So that means if we're going to have any intervention that's aimed at COVID, we have to plan for when that's going to happen. So to give you another really quick example, we don't have in our Māori schools exams on outgoing, because that's when information is swept out. But we will plan to have an exam for some of our kids on a full moon when their intellect's at its best and when we have an incoming tide. So we're changing the function of how we deliver knowledge. For that space, it's based on moon movements, but we're also looking at 3 and 4 day assessments of signs that come from trees, fish, birds, insects, and weather patterns. Those are replacing all of the RAMS forms and safety actions plans for our communities now. So when it comes to conveying knowledge, we're taking that on fairly aggressively.
Wow, there's so much to process and think about, and thank you. I'm gobsmacked in terms of what you've shared and how, and the connection to the land. And again, I middle-aged white woman, no question. And so taking this all in, thank you. I just appreciate it. It's just, again, when you learn, you're a better person. So I appreciate it, really appreciate it. Thank you. Carrie, can I go to you? Oh, it looks like daughters are home. Ah, there we go.
Miigwech to that. So very quickly, I think about all of us trying to work together, whether we are Indigenous, whether we are European, whether we are Chinese, doesn't matter where we come from. We're all human beings. And I think somewhere along the line, we forget the fact that you were there, I'm here, and we're different. We are the same species. We are human beings. And although you see the same species that kind of change somewhat, we're still the same species. We still have the same characteristics that bind us together, that create the same species. And from what the Cree believe, we believe that human beings are the only species on Earth that forget who they are. And that's why Mother Earth is there for us, to remind us every day that we are all of those values of love and kindness and respect and honesty and accountability and responsibility. The behaviors that you see in the world is when we're not connected to that. You don't see trees behaving like bears, right? You see trees behaving like trees. So when we think of this, we are all human beings. And if we're going to do this together as the human beings that we are, we need to realize that we all come from earth-based teaching somewhere. It doesn't matter who we are. Our earth-based teachings, we've all been colonized. Everybody in this world has been colonized. And so some people have been colonized multiple times. So we know that the memories of our ancestors are passed down to us. So we still have those memories of Mother Earth and how to work and how to do these things together. And so we have to recognize that if we destroy Mother Earth, we will be gone. Mother Earth is our relatives, and that Mother Earth is our mother. Those plants and animals are our relatives. our cousins. And so how do we do this? If we are going to change this, if we are going to figure out how to be a kinder and gentler place, how to embrace the environment and human beings, and try to end this racism and discrimination, it happens with Mother Earth too. You see human beings being very discriminative towards water. I don't know, but it's not right. We need to realize that we are human beings. We all come from earth-based teaching somewhere. We are all whole beings. We're not just cognitive beings. We are whole beings. We feel, see, hear, listen, smell, taste, know, and we forget those pieces. Somewhere along the line, we forget those pieces. It becomes such a cognitive society and world that all that matters is what you think and what you look like. And so if we're going to do this together, we have to have the awareness. And the only way that we're going to get the awareness is work with the people that are closest to the earth, who are Indigenous people. We don't want to lose the knowledge of the earth and the relationship we have with Mother Earth. Because if you cut us out of this, and I'm not talking about you, Heather, or Janet, or anybody else, I'm talking about if somehow we are cut out of this, the world will not be here. So let's face it, if we're going to do this together, we need to realize that you have to look to the Indigenous people in every continent, in every country around the world, because our teachings are so similar and they're so based on relationship to each other and Mother Earth, and we work from there. So instead of seeing us as, why are we doing this for Indigenous people? Because the Indigenous people have the memories. We know how to do this, to create that balance and that wellness in the world. So I thank you for that, and thank you for this whole session. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, my heart. Reg and Rose, what are your thoughts about this question? Rose, do you want to go first? Oh, you guys are on mute. Can you unmute? Yep, there you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
The reality in our community is our young people are ODing on drugs and stuff, and our older people are dying. So there's very limited resources in our own community, and we're trying our best, but there's so little time, and that's why we just depend on our ceremonies, because one of these days it'll click, because some of our young people, we have an app, the Blackfoot app, a language app, that they're starting to know the language, and I think by that and by going to our ceremonies, that's where they're going to pick it up. Slowly it's being taught in our schools, and I think it's a long process because of the colonization that has happened within all over the world. But we're still existing, we're still going, and we still keep going. And I think working with the ARP, I think that's a real key, because you have to make relatives in order for something to change. And we have to make true relatives, right? Heart to heart, and remember that ethical space of both. So that's all I have to offer. Thank you.
Rose, thank you. Dr. Reg.
Okay.
Okay.
I just like to acknowledge all the other panelists and their knowledge. I also learned from their perspectives. I think it's important to hear other perspectives, because it builds the confidence in you that you're going in the right direction. And I'm so honored to hear them. I think one of the things that I was thinking about in working with communities so that we can help, I think not only are we talking about our own individual communities, but we're talking with organizations like ARP and other organizations that work with a larger community. We have that challenge where they're calling on elders also. How do we work with that community? I think one of the main things we need to do is we need to build our capacities. And when I talk about our indigenous capacities, I'm talking about what the elders here call Echitapikshimsta, or Indian thinker, because as an Indian thinker, we're already connected to the land. So we talk about our creation stories, which is our knowledge base. And those creation stories tell us that when Creator created, say, the world, for example, he infused sound into the world and vibration. So, and then that sound and vibration was for everybody to become relatives. So when everything was created, the elders would say everybody's equal. Nobody's stronger than the other. So just listening to those stories, we consider those from a verbal society. Those are our natural laws. A natural law, we're all relatives. A natural law on the world itself, humans were put on, they're all relatives, and they're relatives with the land and the environment and the ecosystem. So those are natural laws. And when we think from an indigenous perspective through those oral stories, then we tend to be responsible and transparent to those natural laws as we make decisions in the way we're going to move ahead with our lives. And what comes from those natural laws are practical laws. So some of the practical laws give us an oral management system that we navigate in an oral system to gain rights and privileges. So once we gain a right and privilege, we have an oral system. So we didn't have certificates or documents, but songs were parallel to those certificates and documents. So songs are very understandable in our system. So as I talk about natural laws and our responsibilities and transparencies to think indigenous thought from that perspective, we're already tied to the environment, and we're already tied through an oral system, smudge and circle and so on. So songs are important. So that's a system that we're familiar with. And when we talk about relatives to the land or to animals and plants, and those are our relatives we have to look after. However, in our case here in this Treaty 7 area, once the treaty was made, the colonists put together their laws, and one of their laws was the Indian Act. And the Indian Act came from a written management system, and all the authorities went into that written default system. So that imposed on our oral system for all these years, where we lost trust, we lost respect, and our young people, even today, because of assimilation to the imposed system, are addicted to the default system. And our elders are talking about how do we pull them back? How do we detoxify those youth from that addiction to the written default system? So I think this is where it's so important, where we work with, say, like parks, because we're looking at our indigenous thought perspective that ties us to the land, to use land-based teachings to be able to bring the youth back, like in the camps with the elders and youth, so that we can start giving them some of those basic principles from an indigenous perspective. I think it's important, not only we have to get together with our youth in ethical spaces where they feel safe from the default system in an ethical space, but the elders need to feel safe from their indigenous perspective, oral system perspective, to be safe in that ethical space also. Because through those discussions, we're finding parallels. And as we find parallels, then we're able to take on challenges. What is science? What is governance? What is work? What is land-based teachings, and so on? Those are challenges we need to take on. But it's got to be that discussion between the two systems to be able to parallel. If we and I think since culture started coming back, they were connecting them. They were combining culture with Western perspectives. And as you combine it, then the elders are saying we're looking at what we're doing is we're culturally confusing our kids, because in our way, I was taught before I went to before I was assimilated, I went to our traditional model of education, and creator was number one in our number system. So creator was a circle. But when I went to residential school, number one was a line that went up and down. So which is number one? When assimilation happened, number one took over the circle and had more authority. But now today, if we combine the circle and number one, then we're going to start wondering which is number one, because cultural confusion is going to happen. So this is where we're elders are saying we need to come get together in these ethical spaces with our technical thinkers, our Indian thinkers, technical thinkers, along with Western technicians, and start having that parallel language. And together we can take on these challenges, or how we might look at moving ahead. And I think that ethical space, we're using it here in our community, but we're also using it with many organizations across Canada. I know Parks Canada is looking at working with ethical space with many Indigenous people, especially when they had their ICE committee to give advice of the Indigenous people to give advice, or the National Indigenous Advisory Committees. They're working through the ethical space to look at how we might co-manage Parks land. And through that co-managing Parks land, we can address questions like access to the plants and animals and medicines we need from Parks land that right now we don't have access. So I think it's not only teaching the youth and our communities about our Indigenous way of thinking, but it's also working with Western organizations that are looking at working with our communities. But we need to meet them at a parallel level in these ethical spaces, to level out that authority between two systems, so we can take on challenges we need to take on. And I think that's work that's just started, and I'm hoping in my lifetime I see a change happen. And that's where I give gratitude to ARPA to become an ally to this ethical space and making relatives to allow us to learn from each other and take on challenges.
Thank you. Thank you. I really, really, really appreciate that. And I'm grateful for the work that you all do and how you've shared your heart and your thoughts with us. And I feel like I know nothing, but I'm learning. And I think that's what's important. Thank you all. I believe that we have some lovely young people with us who
Just
came.
one quick before you move though, because I really want to hear those lovely young people.
I do too.
I've only seen them through Zoom or pictures. So one day I hope to get over there to see them, to meet them. But one of the things that just baffles me, right? Because I'm a deep thinker. And we're talking about being parallel. And I don't think you will ever be parallel as Indigenous people unless the colonizers can honestly look at themselves and their participation in how that keeps people like us down. Now, we have people in organizations that have helped us and continue to guide us and those kind of things. But it's like, where's the movement, right? So we're here and I'm going, okay, we've got lots of partnerships. We have a lot of, things like that, but it's kind of always goes back to you as Indigenous people fix it so that we're more comfortable. You see what I'm saying? And so I have a hard time with that, but you can bet I'm going to reflect on that, right? To my Blackfoot elders,
for sure.
Because you can't help people live according to the natural laws when they're not willing to really look at themselves. And it's still, I know here we're just, they have to be willing to dig deep. And I think, that's one, I always say that's a big advantage I think that Indigenous people have. It's just like all of a sudden, we're there. But for non-Indigenous folks, I was kind of like, especially colonizers, I was going, we could talk for hours and hours and hours, but nothing's going to change. I mean, if you look at the states right now, they're calling each other names. And so we can't even get to a discussion of what is a natural law, right? Because they're too busy arguing about what's right, what's wrong. It's not really about, because in that power system, somebody has to lose. And they don't want to lose, in my eyes. I'm kind of harsh right now, but that's just how I feel. Because how can you teach people a connection to the land if they're not even willing to walk out in the middle of mud? Like that. Yep. So I mean, I will reflect on that. That's just the type of person I am. But I do not want to take any more time. But I do want to hear these young ladies.
I do too.
Yeah.
Let's try to thank you. Let's turn it over to New Zealand and hear us be sung out by these fabulous young women.
Tēnā tātou anō. I've got 3 of my daughters here today, and we're in my wife's classroom at the school.
Welcome to my classroom.
I'm on my way home, and this was the easiest way to get everybody in one spot, just to come straight to the school.
Kia ora, ko kai taku ingoa ngamihi. Kia ora, ka niwa taku ingoa ngamihi.
Hi.
You're muted. You've actually muted out. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we hear you.
Did you get their names?
No, we didn't hear you. You were muted.
Okay.
Kia ora, ko kai taku ingoa, ngā mihi. Where is it? Ko aniwiniwa taku ingoa. My name is Aniwa.
Kia ora. Hi, I'm Rachel. You're in my classroom at the moment. That was the best place for us to get together and do this, so enjoy.
Okay, so Aniwaniwa is my oldest girl. She's 17. Aniwaniwa means rainbow. In our culture, rainbow's the god of war. It's nothing to do with peace.
I'm actually evil.
Awatea is my little one over here. Awatea means to reach enlightenment. It means that you can see everything and understand your world. This one is Kaya. Kaya means, or is the person who walks along the back of the battalion of soldiers and incites warfare and gets them all moving. So she's like a sports psychologist, really. Or maybe she just talks a lot. I can't tell the difference. These girls are going to sing you a song, and then we can wrap things up from there, perhaps.
This song is called He Kakanoaho. He Kakanoaho.
Thank you. That was awesome. Thank you for sharing your family with us. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
To my fellow panelists, to those ones that organised this, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity. Reg, the Crowshoe whānau, Ida, Kerry for sharing everything you did, and Janet and Heather for bringing everybody together. Kamihi.
Amazing. Thank you all so very much for your time, your energy, your enthusiasm, your honesty. Learned a lot today, and I know our 368 delegates in Alberta also did as well. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Appreciate it. Take good care, everyone. Be well.
Thank you, everyone. And I will leave it at that. We are now done.